And now, without any further ado, as more people come in the door, I want to introduce Robert Sullivan. As I mentioned, he's a member of our steering committee, and we're thrilled to have him with us. He's a retired environmental scientist from Argonne National Laboratory, horticulturist, landscape architect, and naturalist. He currently manages the rooftop native pollinator garden at the Center on Halsted in Chicago and administers the Northern Illinois Native Plant Gardeners Facebook group. While at Argonne, Bob wrote a comprehensive guide to light pollution impacts and prevention. Bob also co-authored a guide to invasive plants in the Chicago region, actually, which we also have posted on our website and would love to share out with people to broaden that awareness as well. Invasive plants of the Chicago region, and he writes profiles of Chicago region's native plants and pollinators for social media. He grows and distributes free native plants and seeds in the Chicago area to schools, community gardens, and individuals. He's working on his volunteer hours for the Illinois Master Naturalist certification, and he volunteers at the Chicago Botanic Garden and other locations in the Cook County Forest Preserve. So he's just incredibly active. And I will stop the share, and we are recording. If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, and we will circle back around to questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I am hoping that A, people can hear me, and B, you are looking at the title of this presentation.
We are.
So first of all, thank you, Leslie, and thank you to Natural Habitat Evanston for allowing me to talk on this topic. So I am just going to plunge right in and tell you what I know. So what I am hoping you will come out of this presentation understanding is what the term artificial lighting at night means. You'll hear me use the term ALAN constantly. That is artificial lighting at night. And I want you to understand what light pollution is, how that harms humans and ecosystems, humans socially, but also health-wise, ecosystems, really an issue of animal health and ecological processes, and then wrap it up with a discussion about simple steps that you can take at home or wherever you are to help lessen the impacts of artificial lighting at night, or really light pollution. Okay, so there we go. So why is it important that we are talking about this? There has been a lot of research done that shows that artificial lighting at night, or ALAN, when it is not done wisely, and in fact, really any time there is outdoor lighting at night, it can affect animals, including human health, and it also, importantly, in the ecological sense, disrupts certain animal behaviors. We are sadly currently undergoing pretty precipitous declines in the number of insects and birds. I know a lot of you probably have read in the news that we have some serious declines in birds. Fewer people know about the declines in insects, but they're very real and very concerning. More on a human sort of social aspect. At this point, it is thought that 80% at least of Americans cannot see the Milky Way at night where they live. And for anyone in many suburban and urban areas, they may actually only see a few stars at night. And I'll talk about why that matters. Importantly, in the times that we're in, ALAN, artificial lighting at night, when it is used improperly, it winds up with a lot of wasted energy because so much light exists that is either not needed or is more than is needed or is not actually going to light up an area where it's serving any kind of useful purpose. Of course, it takes a lot of energy to produce light. And when we are producing energy, we are, of course, contributing to climate change if we are using fossil fuels, which to a large degree we are. So I want to talk a little bit about why, although many people think of darkness in particular as something to be dispelled, uh, it's actually very important in a lot of different ways. And although I won't spend much time on this, I do want people to really understand that this is more than just, looking up and seeing the stars at night. So I will be talking about night skies and natural darkness. They're really kind of two different things. Night skies are really when we look up and we're looking at the heavens, so to speak. We that includes night skies and night sky values. When I talk about natural darkness, I'm really talking about what you see around you, more or less at ground level, and that is important for reasons I will get to. When we're talking about night skies, of course, it has aesthetic and spiritual value for us to be able to see the heavens and celestial bodies. It also has wilderness value. So if you are in a wilderness area and you are trying to be one with nature without being subject to seeing or hearing or intrusions from the human world, then to be able to see a truly dark night sky is part of that wilderness experience. When you can't see all of the stars and you know that the stars are faded or gone because of human lighting or pollution or whatever, that causes a diminishment of your enjoyment of the wilderness. If you are in a Native American tribe, it can be interfere with very important cultural values that you may share in your life way. It, in certain locations, has historic importance because of activities or even places that have been built or exist in order to serve some kind of purpose at night. There is actually I may surprise a lot of people, there is a lot of recreation that occurs at night. And an obvious one is stargazing, just going out to enjoy the stars. If you are in certain parts of the country, though, you have a lot of people actually going out for star parties, with telescopes, in some cases, making a vacation that centers around going to a place with really dark skies and spending quality time there. So that has recreation value. It also has a lot of economic value. Of course, the night sky has value to professional astronomers. I want to note that at this point, many uh, observatories that were built in the 20th century can no longer be used for any valid astronomical purpose because of light pollution. And now observatories often have to, if they really want to get dark skies, they have to build them in very remote areas at a lot of great expense. And I'm talking like Chile, out in the desert in Chile. So, as one example. Um, People are often not aware that it actually has value to the military. The Army and armed forces need to be able to fight at night. They need to be able to train at night. And when their training areas are lit up by artificial lighting or Alan, that is a problem for them. So all of this, of course, translates into economic value. And it's actually more than you might think. Um, but natural darkness, on the other hand, is to some degree something that people truly enjoy, being in a dark place. But what I really want to talk about primarily is its ecological importance. And that is the main topic of this. I'll be talking about that a lot more. It turns out darkness is very important to both human and other animals and plants for proper health and functioning. So I need to move something here so I can see my text on this slide. Okay, so what is ALAN, or artificial lighting at night, is the acronym, or sorry, ALAN's the acronym. We're simply talking about light sources that are made and operated by humans. And so, of course, that doesn't mean daytime lighting. And what I am, although Allen artificial lighting at night technically includes indoor lighting, I am going to be talking almost exclusively about outdoor lighting. And I'll just say that indoor lighting is definitely a health problem. I imagine most of you are aware of the problem with using cell phones or iPads or what have you late in the night when you should be preparing to sleep. So what is light pollution? Well, when we have ALAN, artificial lighting at night, that is not wanted by at least someone, or it is causing some kind of harm either to humans, whether that be aesthetic or cultural, or it is causing ecological or health problems, then it is light pollution. And just to note that a lot of light pollution is, and it's not technically defined this way, but it basically boils down to light that isn't going where it should be going. So when light is illuminating an area where it isn't actually serving a purpose, that is wasted light. And that's definitely a problem. And it is, unfortunately, a lot of the light that we generate winds up being wasted. So there are four types: sky glow, light trespass, glare, and light clutter, and over illumination. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these. Some people classify these differently or use different names for them. But anyway, you'll get the point, I think. So, sky glow is a brightening of the night sky. So, if you're in Evanston or anywhere, in fact, in the Chicago area, and certainly if you look toward Chicago, you will see that the sky over the city or over your suburb is 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 bright, and you will not see stars. That is called sky glow, and it's caused by light reflecting off particles in the atmosphere, whether it is moisture or it is dust or pollution. And so it obviously, if you've looked up, you've experienced this and probably do every night. You can't see the Milky Way in Chicago. When we have the Perseid or other meteor showers, you really generally cannot see them in an urban area or even a lot of the suburbs here. It has a huge effect on professional and amateur astronomy, and it also interferes with certain animals' ability to navigate or migrate at night. Some birds, it is believed, and I think it has been proven more or less, um, use the stars as an aid to navigation, at least in some cases. And when they cannot see those stars, they have a problem navigating in the presence of artificial lights. And I'll talk more about that later. Light trespass is illumination of an area where light is not wanted or needed. And so if you are like me, a person who has lights from the neighbors or street lights shining into your house at night, you are being impacted by light trespass. The people who installed that light presumably are not interested in illuminating the inside of your house. And in most cases, lights that other people put up aren't even intended to illuminate your property, but they do. And of course, street lights, especially if they are not put in as with care. And this is a situation, fortunately, that is improving, at least in some areas, will also be casting light into your house or your business or your yard if you're trying to enjoy either the night skies or just being out in your yard at night. Another important aspect of it is when it is shining into a natural area. So I did this talk in Glenview last year. I imagine most of you are familiar with Carvana and how they make a tower with all these cars in it. It's very highly illuminated, purposely, of course. And they were going to put this up in Skokie, or sorry, in Glenview rather, right next to the forest preserve. And that was a problem because when it shines into the forest preserve, it's not just a question of, there generally aren't people in the forest preserve after dark. You're not allowed in there, but it can affect animals and potentially plants in there as well. Another local case in Glenview, North Branch of the Chicago River Country Club installing uh, not squash courts, paddleball courts at night, very popular now. They need to be pretty well lit, spill light going off the courts and illuminating the banks of the river where there are fish and other animals using that habitat at night. So these are all examples of the annoyance of the sleep disruption and health effects, which I will be talking more about. Glare is something, if you're getting older like me, you are experiencing it more when you drive. It is unpleasantly bright light is really the simplest way to cause it. And usually it involves directly looking at the light source or the reflection of the light source. So if you think about the glare from headlights, of course, if you're driving, somebody's got their brights on, or these newer headlights that are very bluish white, it's hard to see, obviously, because your eye is trying to adjust to the glare. You will sometimes see it off pavements, even in the day. So when you're seeing this light that's so bright that it causes discomfort, or in the worst cases, actual pain, that is an example of glare. So that can be a safety issue, of course, if you're driving and you can't see properly, but it actually ruins your night vision. When you experience glare, especially any light at night, will affect your ability to see in dark conditions, but glare especially takes a long time to recover from. And until you recover, you don't see properly in the dark. And that actually can be a safety hazard as well. And also, because your eye adjusts to the light that you're exposed to, when you look at glare, your eyes will very quickly adjust to that glare. And then when you step out of that lit area, you really won't be able to see well at all. So you can't see what's in the shadows. So if you think about security around your house, if you shine a really bright light, and your eyes adjust to that light. It makes it harder for you to see in the shadows. So if the bad person or some threat is actually in a darker area, you will not be able to see it. And you might actually be able to see that person or that threat more clearly if you had less light rather than more. Kind of counterintuitive, but definitely the case. So lastly, we have light clutter and over illumination, which is simply just having too much light, too bright, too many light sources. And so anytime you're in downtown Evanston or Chicago or any other urban area, it's pretty common to see that. It is less of a problem in terms of any kind of ecological problem or even human health, certainly. Uh, but it can be distracting if you're driving or confusing if you're trying to walk through an area that you're not familiar with. It, of course, has aesthetic impacts, and it is very wasteful of energy. Oops. Okay, so now we know what Allen is, we know what light pollution is, and what does it do? Okay, so we often will refer to two types of light pollution. It's all coming from Allen, from artificial lighting at night, but sometimes we'll talk about astronomical light pollution, and that is the light pollution that actually makes it harder to see the stars, the Milky Way, the planets at night, or anything. So when you look up and you can't see what you want to see or what you should see, we call that astronomical light pollution. Ecological light pollution is when it is not as dark uh, down on Earth, let's say. That would include in trees, of course, but on the ground and in the environment where most animals and humans spend all their time. And so it is ecological light pollution that has health effects and ecological effects. And of course, astronomical light pollution is more kind of a social enjoyment, cultural kind of impact. So we are looking at what is called the New World Atlas, part of it, the New World Atlas of Sky Brightness. This is derived from satellite data. And so this is a picture kind of to give you an idea of the sort of status of light pollution in the United States. So what this is a measurement of how bright, if you look up at any given place in the US, how bright is the night sky beyond what it would be in the absence of any artificial light from humans. And so if you look out in the West, you'll see I'm seeing 7 or 8 areas that are black. Those are the few remaining areas that are very, very close to natural darkness. So that is what most people would call pristine night skies. As soon as you get out of those areas, there is at least some evidence of sky brightening from uh, human caused lighting. And so I hope you can see my mouse. So here, this is Denver and Colorado Springs. And you see it is obviously it's not black, but out west there are fewer cities and they're much more dark areas. So in some of these areas where it is dark blue, for anyone from the Chicago area, these would seem like very dark skies. For an astronomer or somebody who is from out west, they won't be necessarily pretty good skies, but you would likely still be able to see the Milky Way pretty well. Once you start getting into the Midwest and the East, we're talking a really totally different story. So Chicago, right here, is bright, and that is indicating that in the worst places, the night sky is between 40 and it could be greater than 80 times brighter than what it was here before people started uh, making Ellen. Before there was artificial lighting at night, which is a very recent development, the entire country would be black. Now it's much, much, much brighter. And it's a problem for all of the animals that live here. And it's a problem for humans because we're being exposed to a huge amount of light uh, uh, every night. Some reason I'm hitting the wrong button and going backwards occasionally. So I've talked about some of this. I'll just go quickly through some of the social impacts of light pollution. So if I grew up in Wilmette and I was an amateur astronomer as a kid, I spent a lot of time out in the backyard looking at the night sky. And in Wilmette, when I was a kid in the 70s, you could see the Milky Way on a good night and fairly clearly, and you could see a lot of stars. I thought it was beautiful. It made me curious. I got binoculars, I got star charts, and it led to a lifelong interest in the night sky and really connection to my work. I mean, I wound up doing this kind of work that's lost when you can't see the Milky Way or it is damaged. Let's say your personal connection to the night sky. If you look up and you just see a couple of stars, okay, well, you know they're stars. It's a totally different experience than going out to a place where it's dark and being totally overwhelmed by the night sky and the Milky Way. You understand your place in the universe in a way that you really can't when you can't see these things. If you are in some Native American tribes, you can be losing an important piece of your cultural identity. And in fact, all of us are aware, or I assume everybody's aware of the zodiac and the constellations. It's part of our folklore too. Well, if you can't see most of the stars in the Big Dipper and you can't see Ursa Minor, the little bear, that's all lost. And it is at a certain level, for some people at least, it's important, it matters. If you're talking about a place like Chaco Canyon, and I hope some of you have been out to these wonderful ruins from the Anasazi culture in New Mexico, a wonderful archaeological site, but it also is an archaeoastronomy site. So there are structures, stones there and structures that were built as a primitive, I don't want to say astronomical observatory because we don't know what they were doing, but obviously they aligned stones so that at certain days light would come through and make what they call well, in that case, it's sun daggers, but also there are configurations that have a relation to the night sky as well. So when you can't see the night sky, you lose that ability to understand something important about this historical site that you are in. There is just the simple loss of aesthetic value, and that um, is, apart from your connection, any kind of personal or spiritual connection, we just lose that beauty. We have the wilderness impacts that I talked about. It does affect not certain types of nighttime recreation. There is a potential loss of revenue, which is actually important in a lot of small towns out in the West. And then we have the problem of decreased military preparedness if we cannot get good night sky conditions for our armed forces to train. So what is the basic ecological and health problem? Well, you saw that map of the sky brightness that I put up. All of that change, all of that light originated within the last, couple of hundred years. And for a long time after people had artificial light, the level was of no real consequence. Now it's huge. Everything that lives on light outside of caves or the bottom of the ocean evolves with these natural light sources, basically the sun, the moon, the stars, Milky Way. And the appearance of these lights was on a very precise, changing, of course, but on a cycle that was absolutely predictable. And as a result, a lot of life, and it includes humans, has some biological and behavioral functions that are very important that are tied into these natural cycles and intensities, I want to add, of of light. Okay, so we humans are diurnal. We obviously do a lot of things under the sun, and less at night. Now we are exposed to lights that very much brighter than the moon and stars routinely, and it does have some effects on us. So um, it also affects animal behavior, and I will talk about that. It's only been around for a couple of hundred years, and life on Earth, including humans, are not, biologically adapted to having more or less permanent light that change. The levels change unpredictably. They move around, and life on Earth has not evolved to deal with this necessarily. So, what is the real mechanism that causes at least the health problems? It has to do with the substance called melatonin. I imagine a lot of you, if not all of you, have heard about melatonin. You may not know what it is. I imagine some of you are taking melatonin at night because you know it helps you sleep. Well, it does a lot more than help you sleep, although that is a very, very important thing that it does do. Melatonin is a hormone. All living organisms, at least as far as I've been able to tell or read, produce melatonin. So that includes plants, fungi, and certainly mammals, reptiles, birds, you name it. In mammals, it's produced in the pineal gland, which is in your brain, and it is present also in your organs. So what happens here is you have a sensor basically in your optic system that relays the presence and the intensity of light through your eye into your brain. And that when it detects that, it shuts down the production of melatonin. And it doesn't take a whole lot to shut down the melatonin secretion that your body naturally does in darkness. So melatonin regulates circadian rhythm. So that is your biological clock that controls when you sleep, when you get up, when you feel fatigue. But it does more than that. In fact, affects embryo development, and it has a lot of important health functions. Importantly, among those is biological repair at the cellular level. Melatonin is oncostatic, meaning it stops the spread of cancer in effect. And it's actually very, very important for health. So exposure to allen, even very low levels, blocks your melatonin production. So, I mean, if you are sleeping and you have light coming in, or you are looking at your cell phone or whatever when you should be sleeping, even the relatively low levels of light there will block your melatonin production. So in non-human animals, suppressing melatonin will affect their, eventually affect their, or can affect their reproductive success, growth rates, immune function, and other biological processes that I don't have time to go into. I want to emphasize, of course, it isn't necessarily affecting all of these things in every animal that is exposed to it, but certainly many animals are affected by it negatively in a health sense, one way or another. It can, because these cycles of light and dark that tie into melatonin creation or suppression also regulate certain behaviors in some animals. Suppressing melatonin interferes with that behavior, and I'll talk about that. And just a note, and I'll be making this note a few times in this presentation, bluish white light is a greater problem for melatonin suppression than light that is orange, yellow, orange, red toward the lower wavelength end of the spectrum. And that the fact that bluish white light is more of a problem for light pollution. It is matters both for astronomical light pollution and ecological light pollution. I'll talk about that more too. So if you have too much melatonin suppression, you're going to wind up looking like this guy. Okay, so you don't want that to happen. So what you need to know is that melatonin suppression can disrupt your sleep. It definitely disrupts your biological clock, which are your internal mechanisms to signal everything from hormone production to fatigue. And it is known to interfere with immune function. So when melatonin causes sleep disruption, the melatonin suppression is harmful to your health, but sleep disruption is also very harmful to your health. And that has been linked to everything from obesity and diabetes to depression, anxiety, and also impaired immune function. I want to remind you that, or point out that most of the dire human health effects have been studied or are occurring in people who are shift workers but not exclusively, people who are subjected to a lot of indoor lighting at night. It is less of a problem when it is caused by Allen. Okay, so outdoor lighting is not, I don't think, a major source of health effects on human. However, if you have lights shining in your bedroom at night and that is interfering with your sleep, that can, of course, have health effects. Indoor lighting at night is clearly linked to a lot of serious health problems. And I'll just say that after studying this, I have changed my behavior, my bedtime routine considerably. I'm now doing crossword puzzles in a book instead of looking at my cell phone right before bed. Again, bluish white light is worse. So I think a takeaway from this is, boy, if you are exposing yourself to a lot of bright light, especially bluish white light, which is the kind of light that comes out of a lot of electronic devices indoors, you should take steps to do something about that. You should do your best to make sure that you do not have a lot of intrusive light coming from outside your bedroom into your bedroom, because that light is more than just an annoyance. It's a potential health problem as well. So that's enough about humans. I'm really a plant and animal guy, so that most of the rest of the science part of this is about animals. So I'm sure you're all aware that a lot of animals are not diurnal. That means their primary period of activity is not the day. They're either nocturnal, that is primarily active at night, like an owl or a bat. But many animals are crepuscular, that is their primary time of activity is at twilight, and deer are a good example. I'm sure you, like me, tend to see deer around sunrise or sunset more than you do in the middle of the day. A lot of their activity is around the times of sunrise and sunset. In a lot of cases, animals are both crepuscular and nocturnal. So in the case of animals that are strictly nocturnal or primarily nocturnal, that is, they are up and active and doing their thing in very dark conditions, their whole physiology and behavior is adapted to function at very low levels of light. And in particular, just as an example, some frogs are very, very sensitive to light. So if a frog is sitting at the edge of the frog pond or wherever, and a car comes by, and just in the amount of time that the that light is shining in the frog's eyes, it can take them an extremely long time to readjust to darkness, much, much longer than it would take even a human being. And in that time, they can't do what they're supposed to do. And, if, like find prey. And of course, they are prey. And if they cannot see, they have a much harder time evading predators. A lot of species rely on these natural cycles of daylight and darkness uh, it is important to their health for their melatonin reasons that I just talked about. But also these light and dark cycles trigger and regulate a whole range of behaviors depending on the species we're talking about. That can be everything to where and how successfully they find prey, where or how successfully they can hide from predators, um, their ability to find a mate. There are places where they might select to build a nest, how they actually navigate from one place to another, how they migrate for animals that migrate, how they communicate with each other. And like us, they need to sleep. And so when their cycles of sleep and or cycles of daylight and darkness are disrupted, it can affect their sleep as well, which has those health effects I talked about. So to kind of summarize how light pollution affects animals, and then I'll give some examples of this. It can affect the health of individual animals through sleep disruption, melatonin suppression, and uh, but it also can alter their behaviors or processes that they undergo as part of their active life that are dependent on day length and light and dark cycles. So a lot of animal behavior is and actually plants affected by day length. So part of the reason that leaves drop their or trees drop their leaves in the fall and certain animals begin their migration, it's not just because of cold. It is because the day length is changing. And when it hits a certain number of hours of light, that is one of the signals that makes them start their migration. If light makes the day longer effectively, that is disrupting that important signal that tells them it's time for me to migrate, or it's time for me to do some other thing, find a mate or what have you. So It, like humans, so it also makes animals active or inactive at the wrong time. So there's a thing that's called niche partitioning, where certain animals operate at certain light levels to avoid competing with other species that would also be operating at those same light levels, but would be perhaps eating the same kind of prey. So it's a way, in essence, to let different species occupy the same ecological niche, whether that is uh, just their physical presence in an area, or their ability to find mates, or their ability to find prey. They partition based on light intensity. So if the day is longer than it should be, and it is lighter at a certain time than it should be, then that can actually make these competing species be present together when they should not be. And if the prey is supposed to be active at a certain light level, or it is in completely natural light and darkness, and the prey, because it is also tied into light intensity and light levels, um, its prey may not be active at the time that it is actively trying to hunt. So that gives you some idea of how that could be a problem, I hope. It just flat out enhances or degrades the vision of animals at night. So certain frogs that are nocturnal really cannot see well in bright light. And a lot of animals that are diurnal actually can't see well in darkness. So if you think about a bird that is primarily diurnal, active during the day, they may be able to see better around lights. And because they can see better, they can hunt in darkness when they wouldn't normally be able to see well. And you can see again, that messes up predator prey relationships, and that can be a problem. And certain animals are attracted or repelled directly to lights or away from lights. So I'm sure we all know that many insects, particularly moths, but many other insects are attracted to lights, and they will fly directly toward them. Well, other animals will fly away from lit areas, whether it is because they don't see well, or they are simply, that is a physiological response to move to a dark area, or they can't be in that area because it would make them prey. So there is a certain, in the case of insects and birds, it apparently is some kind of innate attraction to light, at least under certain circumstances, whereas in other creatures, it is approaching lights or moving away from lights because it either allows them to engage in some behavior or prevents them engaging in some behavior that they would do in the absence of that light. And again, these effects on animals are typically worse if the light is toward the blue end of the spectrum. So if you think about the early stage of LEDs when they were just coming out, they were very bluish white, and that has to do with the ease of manufacture. And those are particularly bad because people naturally are not attracted necessarily to that kind of light. They eventually developed these more amber, yellow, red lights that people were much more used to because that's the way incandescent lights were, warmer lights. It turns out they're actually less harmful to a lot of things, as well as being, to a lot of people, more aesthetically pleasing. So I've talked about a lot of this. So I'll just go through this quickly. The timing and synchronization of behaviors and certain processes for some animals are disrupted. Predator-prey relationships and other interspecies relationships can be changed. That, of course, affects the availability of food. And another quick example, caterpillars emerge in response, let's say, to temperature. And if plants are budding out in a relation to temperature, and I'm sorry, I'm screwing up this example, but it's the case that certain prey becomes available because of a combination of temperature and light. And that organism does its thing, and some other species might be trying to raise its young, and it needs access to this prey. But because the light cycles, and now with climate change, the temperature cycles are off, that prey may not be available when the predators need to access it. That, of course, then can change reproductive success. That changes the health of populations. There's a lot of cascading effects and feedback loops. But then there is this issue of light simply basically being death traps, and especially for insects that may be directly attracted to them, uh, and migrating birds, which in certain conditions are attracted to lights. And that when you have all of these bodies of insects and birds around lights, of course, that brings in all sorts of predators and scavengers. So they're getting a ton of extra food, and they're not in other places where they would normally be supplying food to the animals in those areas. So you can see, what a mess that can create. So, some concrete examples. Some species of bats don't emerge from their roosting place until a certain level of darkness occurs at the entrance to the roost. So if you have a bat box or you have bats in your attic, they aren't going to come out to go hunt until it gets, to a certain level of darkness that is programmed into them genetically. So if you have a bunch of lights that around the entrance to their roost, they are not going to come out at early enough to have exposure to prey all night long, as they would if there were no lights. And it clips them on the other end too. If at dawn it's brighter than it should be, that signals them that when it hits a certain light level, it's time for me to go roost. And the effect then is they have less time to hunt, and then they wind up eating less, and their offspring may have less food when they need to grow. Sea turtles are an example that I'm sure some of you at least are familiar with. In certain species, the parents, the mother lays eggs in a hole scooped in the sand at the beach, and she goes away back into the ocean. These eggs incubate, they hatch pretty much all at the same time. These little turtles come up, and what they really need to do is get to the ocean immediately, because they are not agile on land, and there obviously are lots of dangers on land. In the absence of artificial lighting in a truly dark sky, the brightest thing is the sea horizon. And so they go to the brightest light source. and that takes them toward the sea, and they scamper down and they're relatively safer in the water. When there are lights of houses or street lights on the beach or in the away from the shore, the baby tortoises or turtles will go toward those light sources. And that, of course, then means they're not going to the sea. They either kind of tend to walk around in haphazard directions, or they will go toward a bright enough light and get sometimes hit by a car or eaten by predators. And it can have a pretty serious effect on sea turtle survivability. Birds that migrate. So I'm sure you're aware birds fly into windows during the day. That is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about migrating songbirds, primarily that migrate in large numbers at night in certain seasons. And they are attracted to lights. It turns out that steady lights, steady burning lights, are a much bigger problem than flashing lights. I'm not certain that they know why that is, but particularly when it is foggy, and I think this, or misty, or they cannot see the stars, okay, and they see one light, and there are no other sort of spatial clues that they need to navigate. What can happen is that they are, in essence, trapped by the light. So they will fly toward this light, and sometimes they will hit the supporting structures. They, think a cell phone tower, although those typically will have flashing lights. Guy wires they will fly into, and you have mortality that way. But they also will tend to just fly in circles around this light, and they can't break free in some cases, and they will die either of exhaustion or eventually collide with something, or they will be attacked by a predator. And this is actually fairly common. And there are records of particular incidents where many thousands, I think probably a lot of you heard about McCormick Place and the mortality they had there from birds flying into the building lights, the windows at night. But there have been instances where there have been 20 or 30,000 birds killed in one night around like a transmission tower or other very tall structure that has guy wires around it. And it is a major source of bird mortality, not as big a bird mortality source as cats, but it is one of the many death by 1,000 cuts. So just want to talk a little bit about this picture at the left, the two lights going up through the sky. That is a 9/11 memorial in New York City. And when they turned this on, they realized quickly that thousands and thousands of migrating birds were immediately attracted to these lights. So in this photo, you are not looking at insects, you're looking at birds. So in just a few minutes after turning this on during migrating season, thousands and thousands of birds stop migrating and will just fly around these lights until they're turned off. And that is a potential disaster. I think in this case, they worked with the people responsible for it to, limit the period that it's on pretty severely, and especially during problem periods for migration. Uh, Moz. For younger people in the audience, you won't have observed this at the same level a lot of us older people have, because there are simply fewer moths out there now. Alan is one of the reasons why there are fewer moths out there. But it is not just moths that are drawn to lights at night. And they will fly either directly at that light source or around it. And when they're doing that, they will not do anything else until that light is turned off. So if that light is on all night, they will either fry eventually if they get too close to it or land on it, or they will just fly all night. And so they are not eating. If they are eating, not all moths eat at night or eat at all. They can't find mates, and so they aren't reproducing. And in some cases, they will just die of exhaustion or starvation, or, they're an easy mark for predators, which is one reason why you will find a lot of spiders often around lights at night, because they are a species or a type of animal that benefits from the disrupted predator and prey relationship brought about by Allen. So nobody knows how many insects die this way, but it is certainly hundreds of billions or trillions possibly die. There's really no way to know, but this is going on all over the world and has been for years and years and years. And unfortunately, the amount of light, because of the availability of LEDs, is actually going up, unfortunately, and the growth is pretty significant annually. I think the last example I have is fireflies. I'm sorry, I'm at close to the end. So fireflies use bioluminescence to attract mates, in some cases to ward off predators. They actually flash with amber colored signals in some cases, and they are messed up by lights. It makes it harder for them, for their flashes to be seen. And some of them are predators of other fireflies. And so when the light levels are not right, you will have overlap in between these species that can interfere with finding mates, but also affect predator-prey relationships again. So quickly on plants, it is really more of a problem for lights that are very, very close to the plants. It can cause them to continue photosynthesizing at night when they shouldn't be. There are a number of plant processes that are dependent on light, such as leaf drop, I mentioned earlier, bud formation. That's how they get Christmas cactuses to bloom right at on schedule. And flowering is triggered by day length in some species. So that can all get messed up. But again, it is really much more a problem for very close exposure to light. And I just want to say quickly, if I'm affecting insects, because I'm let's say I'm a bird that eats or feeds caterpillars to my young, and those caterpillars are mostly moth caterpillars, which most caterpillars are, and the moths are decreased because so many have died because they've flown into lights or are affected by lights, and I will not have enough food for my young. And so similarly with plants, so there's a large indirect effect. The loss of insects is catastrophic for birds. For plants, the direct effects, lights don't really affect, and most outdoor lights don't have a big effect on plants. But if those are flowering plants, and most of them are, and a lot of our food are flowering plants, and we have a decrease in pollinators, and moths are important pollinators, just as one example, then the plants can suffer pretty serious indirect effects. So bad news and good news. Artificial light at night, we are simply not going to do without it. It ultimately is an incredibly important thing for humans, so it's not going away. cheap LED lighting is actually fueling rapid growth of light pollution worldwide. The problem is getting progressively worse and quickly. Most people don't know that light pollution is a big problem, okay? And that is facilitating this continually getting worse. So we actually and can do better. It's actually pretty easy to, unlike some other types of pollution, light pollution mitigation is very easy to do. It is pretty well understood. The technology exists. A lot of it is very inexpensive and simple, and it's effective. So when you are reducing light use or using light more intelligently, it is going to save money. It will reduce energy usage, and it is going to reduce carbon emissions. So there are a lot of side benefits to doing this. And the last piece of good news is all of you can do something about this right tonight when you go home. Although in winter, there aren't that many insects, at least, out there to worry about. That's why your Christmas lights per se aren't a big problem. But if you got those yard lights on in the summer, that's a definite problem. So light only when you need it. Okay. If you can turn off lights, you need to do it. If you can use timers to control them, whether that is to make them on only at certain hours or a kind of a motion sensor to have it only go on when it is needed and a few minutes after, that will do a lot of good to keep these lights off at times when they are going to annoy your neighbors or affect animals or plants. You want to direct the lights only where they are serving a purpose. And generally that is going to be down. Okay. So you want, if you got floodlights in your yard, a lot of people have them kind of pointed out close to horizontal or only a little bit down. A lot of that light is going into your neighbor's yard. You need to point that light down. And typically that's very easy to do. You can get shields, or especially if you're installing new lights, you can get them with shields on them, just something that comes out around the bulb so that light is not scattered out toward the side. You really want to avoid horizontal lighting. You don't want it pointing up into the atmosphere, and you don't want to be pointing it into areas where you think there may be wildlife. Okay. You want to point light down, and you want to only have light pointing to where it serves some useful purpose. Okay. You can also screen it using structures or vegetation, although not all vegetation screens effectively in the winter. And it's also useful and important to close your drapes and shutters at night to keep those insects and birds, although I don't think birds go to many houses at night, but it is important certainly for insects to just not have your indoor lights attracting them. Many of us are over lighting. We're over illuminating areas. Okay. I talked about it interfering with your dark adaptation. You actually can't see well in overly bright lighting conditions. So you want to use the minimum number of fixtures that you need and turn them down. Your front porch does not need a super bright light, a pretty low wattage light, and it can be kind of a reddish one. Doesn't have to be that daylight blue light for a lot of purposes. If you have a walkway, it's great to have those bollard lights that are close to the ground and shielded, pointing the light down at your feet, because that's where you need to be able to see. And then you want to use light of the appropriate color. So you can actually buy what's called wildlife friendly lighting. Sometimes it's labeled that way, but in general, what we're talking about are lights that are amber, orange, or red. They have a lot less health impacts. They have less effect on the night sky when they are shining up into the sky, and they reduce wildlife impacts. You want to stay away from those blue or bluish white lights. They're bad in almost every aspect of these effects. And then you want to use light only if you need it. So you don't need to have your entire yard, at least most of us don't need to have our entire yard illuminated. And so you think about places where you could either just do without the lights at all, because they're just there for vanity, or no purpose at all, or use markers or light colored pavement, or even if we're talking about a place you go to rarely, um, headlamp or a flashlight so that you don't have to install a permanent light. So, I hope that was quick, but I hope you can see that right around your house right now, you can actually reduce this problem of light pollution. And you can influence your village or your municipality when they are lighting areas because they are putting a lot of lights in public areas and also light that spills into your private property. You can encourage them to use better lighting. There's a lot of information out on the web. The International Dark Sky Association, which I think has changed its name to darksky.org, has all sorts of information appropriate for municipalities who want to light their communities more intelligently. Um, and just the last thought. So I think we need to stop thinking about darkness as a problem. It's an incredibly valuable resource. It is necessary for life on Earth, just like clean water and clean air is. And we need to treat it like it's valuable, whether it is seeing the night skies or just darkness around us. We act as if light is a cure for darkness in a lot of ways. And in fact, darkness is a cure for light because light is the problem, not darkness. So thank you. And I apologize for running over.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for doing this. There are questions in the chat here, and maybe I'll just focus on a couple of them. I know we're a little bit over, so
Yeah,
um,
I really apologize.
no, 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 you're perfectly good, perfectly good. So if you have a second, we'll just do a
Yeah,
few.
yeah,
So how bad, obviously there's the whole issue of one of the first questions was about trying to get regulation of some of this and then it's regulation, but it's also policing. So I
yeah.
feel like that's a big ball of wax to tackle. But on the holiday lights that you mentioned, how bad are one person asked, how bad are the solar lights sold for the garden or mini inline strings?
Well,
What do you think about that?
all light at night is undesirable from a strictly ecological perspective, right? It turns out, though, that the crepuscular times are the most important. So the solar lights are not particularly bright. If I'm envisioning the same thing that the person asking the question is, they often will go off when it gets really dark. But in fact, that the time that they're on is the time when it would be most important to turn them off. So you really would like to have as close to natural lighting conditions at dawn and at dusk as you can get.
And in Evanston, there's a discussion of dark skies in Evanston, which would mean for because birds are attracted to lights when it's in storm or whatever, as you mentioned. So turning off the lights at 10 or 11 o'clock at night until dawn. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's an excellent idea. To my mind, there's a certain level of light needed for security. A lot of light that is for security is way more light than is needed. But you are not getting a lot of commercial or advertising value out of light at businesses or commercial places after 10 or 11 o'clock. There just aren't that many people out. So all of that stuff would be tremendously valuable if you could get people to turn that stuff off.
Right,
And
right,
your own lights, right? To the extent you can, your own lights, your outdoor lights. I have outdoor landscaping lights. They're on. They're off at 11 because I'm not out and about. People aren't coming in or out of my house after 11. There's no reason to have them on then. And I don't have them come on until it is truly dark.
right.
When you need it to, so you don't trip.
Yep, yep, and I do encourage you just using your cell phone, your cell
Yeah.
phone has a ready flashlight right at the end of your arm. Somebody is asking about observatories, and maybe they're asking about, is West Texas still relatively dark? The McDonald Observatory is still able to be used. Do you know about observatories actually being less functional?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
But there was an observatory at Northwestern, that's been useless for probably, 80 years. There are very important astronomy observatories outside of Los Angeles that are essentially useless. And they cost, they made hugely important discoveries. So I know McDonald Observatory because I worked with them at Argonne just peripherally are actively trying to get landowners around the observatory to turn off their lights. They are being affected by this problem, even in dark places. Think back to that map. There aren't really very many places in the US anymore where the skies are truly dark.
Right, right, right. I wondered too, do you know how understand that the Bureau of Land Management was a client of Argonne of you basically.
Yeah.
And so what do you know how BLM uses this information? I mean, is this for parking lots or is this for
It's
what kind of
the work that I did is for all of their structures. Just as a reminder, BLM is a multi-use agency, unlike the Park Service, which is, pretty much recreation and historic preservation. BLM has large-scale industrial mining. It has uh, wind farms, it's got solar plants, it's got all sorts of stuff, gas pipelines, all sorts of things going on those public lands that we own, by the way. And they are responsible to do what they can to also maintain ecological values on those lands. They must do what they can to mitigate impacts from lighting. And if you look at that map that I showed, and you look, there's a huge light source in North Dakota. Okay, there's no city there. It's the oil fields
Mhm.
that are using just astounding amounts of light because they operate 24/7. It's a dangerous environment. It is lit like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah,
Substations are also very, very bright, and there are a lot of them on these agencies' lands, and they're required by law to pay attention to this stuff.
right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we should probably wrap up because it's getting late. But I do want to encourage anyone who's on this, talk and is interested in this topic. I feel like there might be progress that we can make in our local community. So I would love to have people who are interested in this topic to connect. Just email me or something, and maybe we can try to figure out how to coordinate some action maybe through Go Green Illinois, for example, which has 25 communities in it. So, or yes, or maybe emailing Bob here too.
Yes, if you have questions about the science end of things in particular, I'm very happy to answer them. Especially if you put a question in the chat and we didn't get a chance to get to it, feel free to email me. I'll do my best to answer it.
That is great. I so appreciate that. And I'll share his email if somebody hasn't gotten it. Thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate your time and your talk.
Okay, thank you.